Thank you, Dr. Center, for the keynote. May I please request Shankar Maruwada, CEO and co-founder of EkStep, to come on stage and continue the conversation with Dr. Center on the present and future of tech partnerships.
I said, thank you for that wonderful speech. Special Envoy for Critical and Emerging Technologies. You seem to be straddling a whole bunch of silos. Tell us, what does your day look like? What does a Special Envoy do? And why do you think U.S. State Department created this position?
I think it was not to create more bureaucracy, I hope, is the short answer. I think what we realized, first and foremost, is that technology is going to be an inseparable part of statecraft going forward. That we already had, at least in our foreign ministry, and I think many other foreign ministries as well, some technical expertise, but they were only looking at it as an economic problem, as a narrow military problem, as a problem that would impact technology is a problem that would impact democracy and human rights. And no one was looking across these issues. And because no one was looking across these issues, it turned out that oftentimes our senior diplomats who would be formulating policy might not have a technologist with them advising them on how to think through the implications of the technology revolution. I think it was a safe bet as we thought through how to fix that problem, that these opportunities and challenges in technology were going to be with us for the foreseeable future. It's as if we were building a new kind of diplomacy, and we needed someone who could look across these issues, elevate them, make sure that our leadership had them. And then, of course, I think also our goal in creating this position is to help encourage our partners also to elevate technology in their own diplomacy and use the position that I'm in and the expertise we're bringing in the government as a model to help other governments do the same.
You're playing a crucial role at a crucial juncture in global politics. From the CHIPS Act to the IRA, US seems to be determined to create a new global supply chain, reshoring, friendshoring, and protecting technological innovations and markets. At the same time, China seems to be doubling down on domestic technologies. How do you view the current drivers of the geopolitics of technology?
I think first and foremost, we have to look clearly at the situation and acknowledge that the primary reason that foreign ministries, national security communities are talking about technology is not only because we are in the midst of these converging technological revolutions, but because we have to recognize that governments around the world see these as sources of power and leverage and influence. And that is an inextricable component of history at every phase in which there are technological disruptions and technological revolutions. Governments, nations seek to harness them. Our goal in elevating technology in our diplomacy, working with partners, is very simple. It's to ensure that we continue to create a stable rules-based order in which these technologies are used as forces for good, and to the extent possible, their disruptive impacts are minimized on our societies and the resilience and health of democracies. And that what that has required in reality is quite a complicated set of actions which work backwards from the proposition that we have found ourselves in a situation in which our resilience, at least at the manufacturing and supply chain level in many of these technology areas, was far less robust than we would have imagined, or at least the resilience and fragility of the supply chains is a national security problem in a way it would not have been 1 or 2 decades ago. And that's why the depth of that conversation, whether in the microelectronics, pharmaceuticals, has become so important to our alliance diplomacy with countries like India.
You're in Bengaluru, the home of technology and innovation, a city of techno-optimists. The audience in this room is representative of this tech-first ethos of the city. How much of your time goes in understanding technologies and innovation? And how do you apply this knowledge in diplomacy?
So first and foremost, I appreciate the techno optimism. India, at least if you look at polls, is more than twice as optimistic Indians as Americans about the prospects and opportunity presented by AI. And so it is refreshing to travel to places like India to see the prospects and hope for these technology revolutions to play out. I think what's most important is we engage with technologists, and by technologists, I mean really the serious innovators who are at the cutting edge and frontier of these technologies. Is they allow you to imagine futures that are different than the one we see today. What is hardest for all of us, I think, psychologically, is to imagine that the future will be different than the reality that we are living in right now. And that applies also to our technology diplomacy, where in 2023, when I started in this role, I assumed this was just before ChatGPT became a powerful cultural influence around the world, that AI was going to be a far quieter part of diplomacy than our biotech diplomacy and our quantum diplomacy. And within months, it came to dominate the global, not just the global agenda, but the global technology diplomacy agenda. And I think, candidly, if I would have been talking more closely to some folks in the AI community, we would have been in a position to be much more anticipatory than we were. And so that's the kind of lesson that I think all of us need to take forward, is to make sure that we're constantly touching the innovators in whatever the technology it is, so that we can at the very least try to shape the future rather than be shaped by it.
Recently, the Quad Leaders Summit in Delaware that President Biden hosted, that summit produced a principles document on DPI. For many of us who started working on DPI more than 15 years ago, as Pramod in the room, Alok, and several other friends, very much from a domestic perspective, the Quad statement seems extraordinary. You are sitting in front of an audience, many of whom have created or built upon DPIs. Could you give us a sense of how the US government or your office thinks of DPI?
So I do think that Quad statement on DPI is a landmark in the evolution of the U.S. India collaboration and cooperation and thinking about DPI. India's been remarkably successful in rolling out a series of technology innovations within India, and then it's been diplomatically quite influential in taking that concept of DPI, which of course is not exclusive to India, but which India is very much rolling out tech-based solutions to, into a multilateral framework at the G20, in the UN context and conversation at the Global Digital Compact. And I think as the United States thinks about the resonance and appeal of the DPI idea around the world, and why it's generated so much momentum, particularly in the global South, I think what we have to recognize is there's a huge demand for innovation. There's a huge demand to digitize government services. There's a huge demand to find frictionless, relatively low cost, modular, interoperable approaches to the digital revolution. And India has provided a model of success and a technological stack, which has a great amount of appeal. And so I think the United States sees an opportunity to be a part of this. It sees an opportunity to partner with India in reaching particularly the developing world with innovative tech-first solutions. The Quad statement is important because it provides a framework and architecture for outlining the key criteria any DPI project would need to have: transparency, considerations of privacy, cyber-physical security, interoperability, modularity, that I think will help to shape and define what is responsible and productive approaches to DPI and what would be approaches to technology that would hinder or threaten rights, hinder or threaten privacy, create closed systems, all of which I think we oppose jointly in the world.
In the last 2 days, this group has discussed two powerful ideas, DPI and AI, and you've talked about both. But when you put them together, what kind of global opportunities are you seeing for an Indo-US partnership?
This is the intriguing nexus of AI applications with an underlying architecture, physical architecture, digital architecture, where if we can fuse low-cost, interoperable hardware with the incredible innovation unlocked and enabled by open source and closed source AI innovation, which will allow for innovators, big and small, in large and small countries, poor and rich countries, to iterate and create. I think the possibilities to harness AI to solve the kinds of societal challenges which we believe it can solve are really going to exponentially expand. This is where I think the optimism piece that comes out of India can really help to shape and inform the approach of many other countries to the digital future, and really take a narrative that had been quite pessimistic over the past 20 years about digital divides and transform it into a much more hopeful future.
Excellent. Earlier, you told us about the ISET. How unique is this partnership and the new structure that has been created? And what message would you have for the tech builders and venture capitalists sitting in this room?
Well, I think I haven't hidden my views or the United States' views on the success and accomplishments of ISET. It is unique in the sense that a presidential-driven directive stewarded by national security advisors, creating the breadth and depth technology agendas that can activate entire large government agencies across everyone from the niche quantum communities that we have to our more traditional R&D agencies, to our defense departments, to our foreign ministries, which otherwise maybe would have been in backwaters of these conversations, is incredible. We've tried to apply that same model in a few other cases to elevate technology dialogues, to unlock obstacles, to deepen partnerships. And then ultimately, I think the goal will be to try and stitch together these kinds of technology relationships into a broader lattice work.
The US has focused on reshoring the semiconductor industry. The CHIPS Act has attracted investments back inside of America. India, too, is in the early stages of building an Indian semicon ecosystem. What are the opportunities for India and US to work together?
The bottom line is that no country is going to be able to reshore an industry as complicated and multifaceted as the semiconductor industry. What each of us need to do is look at our comparative advantages, look at our minimum national security requirements, and then figure out what a trusted ecosystem would look like that is commercially viable, profitable, that creates comparative strengths. Obviously, already at the design, in the realm of design, India is one incredible contributor to the semiconductor industry. The investments that have been made in the aspirations of India's semiconductor mission rightly are thinking through how then that can translate into fabrication level projects, which I think is part of the larger and incredibly reasonable ambition to generate both commercial opportunity, but also strategic resilience in India. I don't think that necessarily creates competitive pressures that are going to be detrimental to the relationship at all. In fact, just the opposite. In all likelihood, the kinds of investments that we are making, that India is making, that many of our partners are making in their domestic microelectronics industries, I think are going to create an overall ecosystem that is going to serve the kinds of industries that are going to rely on this industry much better in the future.
Building on the idea of trusted ecosystems, in the last year's AI Safety Summit at Bletchley, the idea of AI safety institutes came up, and it is already a reality in many countries of the world, including UK, US, France, and Singapore. And India too is talking about activating a center here. Can you give us a sense of this growing club of safety institutes, and what do you see as their future?
The backdrop for the AI Safety Institute conversation is the remarkable progress made in the international AI governance conversation over the past 18 months, in which we have moved quite rapidly towards a global consensus on what the architecture or framework for safe, secure, and trustworthy AI governance should look like. It's articulated in the landmark documents like the Bletchley Statement, the Seoul Statement. It's been enshrined in the UN General Assembly resolution, which India and the United States co-sponsored on AI. But what it does not do, this kind of international framework, is dive deeply into the technical criteria, technical benchmarks that one would need to actually discern whether AI systems are safe for deployment in societies, whatever that context may be. And in part, that's because the science of AI is so nascent and immature that in the absence of building up the underlying science, it's going to be very hard to make additional progress at the international governance level. And so what the United States has done, what the United Kingdom has done, what India is in the midst of doing is trying to build up a technical capacity to develop and benefit from that AI science, to translate it into benchmarks, guidelines, frameworks that can then translate into whether it's soft regulation or hard regulation in a national context. And most importantly, an interoperable framework in an international context that's going to enable the safe application and enjoyment and acceleration of AI innovation for all of the use cases that we believe it will have to benefit the world.
The US has a positive vision of emerging technologies, often referred to as tech for good. Other countries are sometimes concerned about the dystopian uses of such technologies. How has the US State Department used diplomacy to try and grow the consensus around technology for good with other nations?
As I said, we're not as optimistic as I think I would hope we would be on all of these technology areas. But the Tech for Good agenda is one, I think, that really grows out of a much longer standing U.S. commitment to addressing the challenges and needs, particularly of the developing world, and a recognition that many of the goals that all of us set for ourselves in the world, the sustainable development goals that we all committed to, are further off track than we would have hoped when we set that agenda. And while we're not techno-utopianists, I think we do believe that technology can be an accelerator to get back on track. And concretely, the United States has done a few things, for instance, in how we want to leverage AI for AI for good or tech for good agenda. As I mentioned just a couple of weeks ago, we brought together some of the leading AI firms and collectively committed $100 million towards AI for good. And that's not just in the realm of pushing AI applications to solve specific problems. It's a recognition that the real demand signal in much of the developing world is for capacity building, enablers, infrastructure. And so we want to focus on using this development assistance to provide compute credits, for instance, for small research organizations or governments that may need help, to help encourage and facilitate and catalyze additional training, skill training at all levels up to the graduate level to ensure that countries can become AI ready and ensure also that as models are developed and built, that the kinds of data sets needed to ensure that they are less biased, more representative, culturally nuanced are taken into account. And so there's an abstract idea of tech for good or AI for good. And then there's the concrete actions that need to be taken. And we're quite determined, both in the State Department, our foreign assistance programs, to drive that forward.
Space is often called the final frontier. I'm sure there are a lot of Star Trek fans out here. But in the case of India, it was one of the early movers in this area. And this bet paid off in the form of a well-respected public sector space program. However, the private sector in India is at its stage of infancy. It's very early days. Can the Indian private sector cooperate with their US counterpart as equals? Is there scope for Indian companies to move the needle in the US space ecosystem, which often operates at an exponentially larger level?
I think first and foremost, the best reason for optimism is the government-to-government cooperation on space, which I think unlocks an entirely different conversation within their respective private sectors about how they can engage in space. Obviously, having joint research projects, working on satellite launch together are indicative of a trend that's going to create a new structural reality for our private sectors. I don't know that scale is necessarily the most consequential component of this. I would say, as we see the rapid change and acceleration in other sectors of cooperation, where we've knocked down barriers and obstacles to private sector work, for instance, in the defense sectors, it's indicative of a possibility that the future as we experience it today will not be the reality of tomorrow if there is political and bureaucratic will to move forward. Often, I think the private sector sees barriers and obstacles and gets discouraged from moving forward, from pushing harder in cooperation with governments. And I would hope one of the lessons that we've seen of ISET over the past year is that some of these seemingly insurmountable barriers to private sector cooperation with governments in the U.S. India relationship are not as insurmountable as people would have imagined.
Yeah, that's great to hear. As someone who's a historian, a social scientist, and a practitioner, and in the world of emerging technologies, where is diplomacy going to be needed the most? And what role can India play as you see it in this?
So first and foremost, we should avoid at all costs the kinds of analogies that would overhype or over-securitize the technology revolution that we're experiencing. I think about artificial intelligence and the ways in which automatically the public discussion and even the discussion among AI experts has moved towards the nuclear analogy, whether that's in the context of global regulation through an IAEA or in the context of governments needing to develop Manhattan projects for AI. I think these are deeply, deeply misleading. They're harmful to the adoption and acceleration and responsible governance of these technologies. And what I've been pleased by and really heartened by in conversations with India and talking my Indian counterparts and talking about an AI future and what responsible innovation looks like is this is one place where those kinds of analogies have not nearly been as pervasive as in talking to other countries and governments. And so I think a sober, practical approach to these technologies is one area that's problem-based, focused on solving societal challenges is one area where I think we could learn quite a lot from the Indian approach to technology.
As someone whose job involves peeking into the future through the mists of time and a student of history, what book do you go back to?
I knew you were going to ask this question, so I had to think hard about this. One is actually an obscure book that I guarantee no one here has ever read, which is the official Department of Energy history of the U.S., the origin of the U.S. nuclear program. And you can find it on PDF, but it's not very exciting read. And the reason I highlight this is because if you study the examination of the early period of nuclear history, the evolution of the industry, the evolution of government efforts, it looks nothing like what we are experiencing today in the AI revolution. At the hardware level, at the level of international governance, at the national security application layer, at the role of the private sector in supporting the government. And so it's the kind of historical story which is history at its best, which is ruthlessly honest, which is accurate, not sensational, and which allows us to think more accurately about the experience we're in by finding differences, not similarities to the past. One of the great failures that we all have in applying history is we tend to look for similarities, and then we seize on that similarity, and it's very hard cognitively to escape what we suddenly decide is this analogy. And sometimes it's most helpful to think what is different, not what is alike.
So the confirmation bias could mislead you if you're looking at the past.
We could just all be psychologists and understand it's confirmation bias to not read the history. We could do that as well.
Now, building on that, how do you define technology, innovation, ecosystems from your perspective? What do they mean to you? Technology, innovation. Rudra said Bangalore has a thriving ecosystem. How do these connect up?
We have an interesting situation where I learned this from commissioner on the AI Commission, who is an esteemed and renowned AI scientist. And he said to us, look, guys, it's only AI until you've used it for 2 years, and then it's just software, right? So innovation in technology and novelty wears off extremely quickly when you're thinking about the emerging part of critical and emerging technologies. And so our goal is to rapidly transition from the novel phase to the deeply embedded phase, where a technology is simply a part of embedded in our landscape, our lives, and do that in the least disruptive way for our societies, the least disruptive way for our national security policy, the least disruptive way for our economies. That's the goal of government, good government public policy, as we think about our responsibility for stewarding technology from a critical and emerging phase into a take for granted phase of technology to get through one of these technology revolutions. We know they're always disruptive. We unfortunately know that often they lead to destabilizing consequences for a security environment. We know that they can be deeply destabilizing and revolution producing at societal levels. And so if we recognize those things, then we sort of becomes clearer what our ambition as public policy officials are, whether at a state level, a national level, or an international level.
And I can't let you go without asking this. Any bets on the election?
I can say with confidence that there will be strategic continuity in how we approach geopolitical competition, the role of technology in statecraft. But as my boss, Secretary Blinken, says, we do policy, not politics.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Seth Center, who has done an enormous amount of work over the last 18 months to push forward the Indo-US partnership in multiple ways. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Seth, and thank you for everything.